Okay, so we're going to continue talking about the empires of Mesopotamia. We've talked about Sumer. It really wasn't an empire; it was more like an ununified group of city-states. But they called it Sumer. So we talked about Sumer itself, and then we talked about the Akkadians. We talked about the Babylonians, and now we're going to talk about the Assyrians. So I'm going to go ahead and present. Our learning target, again, is that we can identify how and why empires developed and how they affected people's lives. I'm going to see if I can move my face. It doesn't seem to want to move very well, but I'm going to try anyway. And I'm still at school, and they're wheeling trash down the hallway, so that's why there's that loud noise. Okay, the Assyrians, and of course I'm going to have to move my face again. For 1,000 years after Hammurabi, Mesopotamia came under the rule of empire after empire. Those empires aren't necessarily important, so really we're not going to talk about those. But after Hammurabi, it was about 1,000 years after that these empires just kept recycling through and through. And then about 1000 BC, the Assyrians arrived in Mesopotamia. They were a group of people that were from northern Mesopotamia, almost up by the Mediterranean Sea. Oh my gosh, I gotta keep moving my face. They developed a culture and were united by their worship of the god Asher. Now there's many, many different gods. They were united by ruling of one god. Now they still had other gods they believed in, so that did not make them monotheistic. However, their main god that they worshipped was Asher. In fact, their leader was named after Asher, and that's Asher right there. That's what they carved him to look like back then. You can see the cuneiform up here. Now, Assyrians were the fighters. They had a strong farming economy, and they had a really big professional army. That professional army helped the Assyrians conquer all of Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, and they even conquered Egypt by 650 BC. They had better weapons than the other groups of Mesopotamians. So before these guys came in, Mesopotamians and all of the different empires fought with bronze weapons, which, as you know, when we talked about this in our last time that we talked, bronze is a mix of copper and tin, which they had to trade for. So in order to beat them, or basically the Assyrians had an edge over all their enemies because they used iron, and iron itself is much stronger than bronze. They basically didn't stand a chance against these iron weapons. So as they went in, the Assyrians would kind of just destroy them. They also had horse-drawn chariots and soldiers with bows and arrows. It just made them much better fighters than the other groups did. Here is one of their weapons, one of their iron weapons that they would use. And that's an example of their much better chariots. Now, other groups, yes, had chariots. They were not like this quality of chariot. So they had really good ones. And then just some more of their fighting, some of their bows and arrows, what they would have looked like back then. Let's see if I can hide that little thingy down there. Okay, there we go. So they had a really cruel king. And like I told you, he was named after their god that they worshiped. The god they worshiped is Asher, and they worshiped Ashurbanipal. Soldiers would kill or enslave, capture people, and then burn their cities to the ground. Ashurbanipal is the Assyrian king. He had complete, total power over villages, towns, and cities. He was like the title says, he was a really cruel guy. People didn't necessarily like him. He took over by total power and force. The really cool thing about Ashurbanipal, though, is that he had the first library, which is there's an example of that, where they stored clay tablets. And remember, they didn't have paper. They wrote cuneiform on clay tablets, and it was clay about the size of, in fact, I have one right here. Now I'm still at school, about the size of this. So this is Birdman, actually, from Cahokia Mounds, which is near us, but this is a replica, not real. The real one is in the museum under glass, but this is a replica of Birdman. So about that size, they would take it, form it, and then they would write cuneiform on it, put it in the sun, it would get hard, it would store it forever. Then they would take those. Ashurbanipal built the first library and stored them in that library full of clay tablets. The government sometimes forced rebellious people to move away. In time, the empire again grew too big because, as they say in Hamilton, oceans rise and empires fall. And that's what happened. The end of Assyria happens, just like all of them. They all grow too big, too hard. I don't know why I can't remove my little face. So if I can move it over here. They grow too big to control. too much land, didn't have a way to really keep control of all of it. So their subjects became tired of being treated unfairly by the king. They were also treated very violently and killed a lot. So they just didn't like it. They rebelled. And the internal problems made Assyrians very weak. If people are not loyal to their rulers and rebel, you've got like inside fighting and stuff. It just makes the whole system weak. And then another group comes in to defeat them. And that group is called the Chaldeans. And this is one of my favorite things. If you see back here, I've talked to you several times in class about the Hanging Gardens. Oops, I hit the button by accident. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. This is an example of what the Hanging Gardens of Babylon would look like. It was a building that the king Nebuchadnezzar, that you are going to hear about in a second, built for his wife. And it was a building that was just covered in plants, which to probably now doesn't sound very interesting or even like, wow, who cares? But back then, that would have been an amazing thing to do. They watered these plants with a pump system that fed water through all of these things, which is very, very technologically advanced. It's hard for me to say words sometimes. In fact, in this picture here, you can see water coming out. It's just amazing what they were able to do. So again, we're still working on identifying those empires and how they affected people's lives. So the Chaldeans were nomads who originally came from southern Mesopotamia. They overthrew the Assyrians in 612 BC. King Nebuchadnezzar was the most famous Chaldean king. He ruled for 43 years. The reason why he's so famous, most of it is because of what he built, but he was also not a very nice king too. During this time, the new Babylonian Empire included Mesopotamia and all of the Fertile Crescent. So all of that green you colored in your map, at this point, Babylonian Empire, it's called the New Babylonian Empire, because remember, there's already a Babylonian Empire we talked about. So there's Babylonian, that's Hammurabi, and New Babylonian, which is also known as the Chaldeans, and that is Nebuchadnezzar, okay? And remember, the Chaldeans were originally nomads that came from the south over down by like Persian Gulf, then came in and took over the Assyrians when they were weak. This is just some example of some of the architecture left behind by the Chaldeans. And there's Nebuchadnezzar looking out over his kingdom. And this was his really big ziggurat that he built that we're going to talk about in a second. There's King Nebuchadnezzar, which looks like it says Nebuchadnezzar. So sometimes when I'm spelling it out and I write it, I say in my head Nebuchadnezzar. Just a fun fact. But he brought a new golden age to Babylon. He did this by rebuilding the city and making it beautiful. He did this by all of the architecture that he created. So from miles away, you could see what was called the Tower of Babel. It was a 7-story ziggurat. So we've seen a lot of ziggurats that were maybe 3-4 stories in pictures. This guy made a 7-story ziggurat, and it was colorful, which means he used a lot of different colors in it. So you could see it from very far away. When you went into the city, you came in through what's called the Ishtar Gate, and we'll see a picture of that in a second. His most famous accomplishment, again, was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Not standing anymore. The only one that is the ancient pyramids, the Pyramid of Giza. But this was a wonder of the world. How did he build it? How did he create it? It was amazing technology for its time. Let's see if I can move my face again. Although his empire outlasted him fewer than 25 years, Nebuchadnezzar had built a great city that fits its name, Babylon, Gate of God. And this is an example of his big ziggurat that he made. Again, super big and kind of gaudy, but there it is. And this is the Ishtar Gate. This is a replica that actually is standing there now that you can go and see. The original is gone. Here's just another artist's interpretation of the Tower of Babel here and the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and what it would have looked like. It would have been super impressive and beautiful to see at the time. And that's where we end. So let's go to our notebook. Okay, so here's your notebook. You're going to be on slide 14. You should have already done Babylonia, and we are on Assyria. So who took control 1,000 years after Hammurabi? That was the Assyrians. How did they conquer Mesopotamia? Because they were good fighters and they had strong iron weapons. What was special about their weapons? Again, iron. What did their soldiers use for transportation? They used chariots. What would the soldiers do after they conquered? They would, hold on. I got something popping up. So anyway, what would the soldiers do after they conquered? They would enslave or kill people. And how were the Assyrians weakened? Internal problems. They were fighting a lot. All right, let's see if I can move to, hopefully you see my slide here. I'm not sure if it's working. I think it's showing this one when I wanted to show the other one. It's not working very well. Okay, so I got my face back, so I'm assuming you can see the tab. I had to reload it. Sorry, computer problems. So on New Babylon, we're not doing Phoenicia today. On New Babylon, what kind of lifestyle did they have? Well, they were nomads before they came over and took over after the Assyrians. How did they take power? Because Assyria was weakened from internal problems that they were able to take power. Nebuchadnezzar was their king. He was very cruel. What was the Tower of Babel? It was a 7-story ziggurat. What was their biggest accomplishment? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. When it says describe it, that means describe the Hanging Gardens. And that was big, beautiful, covered with plants and had a pump system that would feed water to the plants. All right, scrolling down, you are also going to answer these questions about the rulers. Ashurbanipal, what was his achievement? He built that big library of clay tablets, about 30,000 of them. What did he have power over? He had complete and total power from everybody underneath him. Nebuchadnezzar, what were 2 things he created? The Tower of Babel. He created the Hanging Gardens. And if you even want to talk about the Ishtar Gate, he created the Ishtar Gate. But the 2 big things, the things that the city was well known for, was the Hanging Gardens of Babel. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon and the Tower of Babel. How did he treat his subjects? He was cruel and mean, and they didn't like him. All right. That is all you have to do today, guys. There is no right side activity. Just make sure you have those questions answered for the rest of page 20 and the ones we went over on the rest of 14 and half of 15 for this one. We'll do Phoenicia tomorrow. All right. Thanks.